and welcome to the 2021 Asian Humanism Conference. Your hosts for this afternoon will be me, Christine Chan, and Danny Hill. Today we'll hear from Guy Harrison and Senator Risa Hontiveros. We'll also have guided theme discussions in breakout rooms. Lastly, we'll be hearing from HAPI, MANS, and hash.peace on the intersections of humanism with climate change, science, and interfaith relationships.
Before we begin today's session, some reminders. Please keep your microphones muted and use the chat box for any comments as well as any questions you may have for the speakers. If possible, please also rename yourselves in this format: your name, your pronouns, and then your country. This session will be recorded and live streamed in the Filipino Freethinkers page. Like and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/freethinkers for updates. Okay, so to open today's session, I'd like to call on Mr. Red Tani, co-president of Filipino Freethinkers.
Thank you so much, Danny. Last week, we learned about intersectionality and how some in our movement have been held back because they didn't acknowledge such issues. As a result, many in the humanist community felt excluded and unable to meaningfully participate. We also got an overview of humanist issues in the region as leaders from various countries spoke about the state of humanism. While last week was focused more on identifying problems, today is dedicated to talking or starting to talk about solutions. Our various guest speakers will each talk about humanist values that contribute to respecting intersectionality. Science is on the side of equality and social justice, debunking unscientific concepts of racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. Human rights depends on the idea that every human being is equal, no one is excluded, and everyone deserves social equity and justice. We'll also talk about two of the most pressing issues for humanists: climate change and interfaith relationships. Finally, in addition to asking our speakers some questions, you will also get a chance to add your insights in breakout sessions where we hope to spark some creative ideas that humanist organizations can follow through on. Thanks so much for choosing to spend your Saturday with us, and welcome to day 2 of Asian Humanism Conference.
Thank you, Red. And next up is Guy P. Harrison, an award-winning author, journalist, and public advocate for science and reason. He'll talk about science for progressive humanist issues. Guy?
Nine
Sorry.
countries. That's okay. 9 nations right now have nuclear weapons. Okay. And that list will probably grow over time because it's it's a good thing to have nuclear weapons if you're a country and you're worried about your neighbor, or you just want more prestige, you want to be heard, you want to be listened to, then it's a good thing to have these nuclear weapons. But it's bad for our species. Right now, early 21st century, there are about 13,000 nuclear warheads among these 9 nations. Russia and the US have most of them, but India, Pakistan, I've read like disturbing studies by scientists who say, a relatively small nuclear exchange between, say, Pakistan and India, say arguing over Kashmir or something like that. And if something happens by accident or intent, even fewer than 100 warheads, that could cause just a global catastrophe. Agriculture would collapse in many regions. The supply chains would be disrupted, money markets thrown into chaos. So there's no escaping this problem, this danger. It doesn't matter if you live on the other side of the world where a nuclear war occurs, you will still be touched by it. Even a modest exchange likely will send so much soot, smoke, ash up into the upper atmosphere that it will blanket the world for maybe years. And it could reduce sunlight significantly, cause extinctions, as I said, hurt food supply chains. So, we all have to think of we have to listen to what science is telling us. Yes, the process of science gave us those nuclear weapons. It gave us a problem. But it's also the alarm, the warning, telling us, all of us, not just the generals and the politicians, but us, the regular people. We have this serious problem. It didn't go away when the Cold War ended. It's still there. We have to take it serious. And a related similar thing, racism. Racism, year after year, decade after decade, it just continues to wear on humanity. It cuts deep. People think more or less of people based on a racial affiliation. People treat each other differently, better or poorly, based on a race identifier. And science, again, is screaming, hey, you got this wrong. Biological races are an irrational belief. Human diversity, human biological diversity is real. We are not all clones, but we're a very young species, very closely related. Every human alive right now is 99.9% genetically identical. So we are making all this noise and mistreating one another based on that tiny little fraction of a percent of difference in our blood, in our genes. That's absurd. And you can easily analyze the race concept. I won't go too deep into it here, but it easily falls apart because some countries have different race rules than others and they contradict. You can be one race in one country and then you go to another country, you become another race. It all changes. It's crazy. And none of this is to diminish the importance and the reality of cultural races. Cultural race identification is very important to many people, and those are real things, and we have to deal with that. But when people believe in biological races, that just empowers this idea of racism. It inflates it far beyond what it should be, and it just keeps going and going. And again, scientific knowledge is the answer. We can do better on that front. Nature, the way we treat the natural world, that's another glaring example of how we are behaving like toddlers who know nothing of science. Science, the last 100 years, it is remarkable what we have learned about the life that we share this planet with. So much life, and it's such a mix. Biodiversity is arguably the greatest wealth on this planet. I think it is. That mix of life that took, at least 3.5 billion years of evolution to produce all this. And right now we're just treating it like it's garbage. We're poisoning the oceans, we're burning rainforests, we're chopping down trees like crazy, we're burning up the atmosphere, we're doing all these things as if our nest, our environment, our home, the natural world means nothing. Now, this is crazy. Most children these days in schools, they're learning at least enough to know that, nature matters. There's pretty things in nature, animals, plants, but we need to really take it up a level. And it's not only climate change. I mean, that gets a lot of attention now, but that's, we could solve climate change right now and still have 100 other problems when it comes to the way we are treating nature. The fish populations in the oceans, all kinds of stuff that we need to address urgently, because we need this life. It's not charity to be into conservation. Okay, it doesn't make you a do-gooder that you just, we need this life because we're part of it. It's part of us and we are part of it. We're part of this biodiversity. So it's clear that we can't keep going like this. It's hard to imagine, impossible to imagine how we can continue, adding nuclear nations to the list, continue destroying biodiversity, squandering it in a flash of time. It's hard to imagine how we can continue looking at our fellow humans as somehow less than human if they're a certain color and the top of the pedestal if they're another color. It's just too much friction, too much suffering, too much inefficiency. We squander too much brain power. Too much creativity is being lost to that crazy idea. So we can't continue doing that. We need to become fully human. We need to become passionately human. And we need to understand that, as I mentioned earlier, we're far from perfect. We are prone to believe nonsense. It's just a thing we do. We see things, we interpret them in crazy ways, and we cling to them and defend them in our minds and don't want to let go of this, crazy belief we got, all because of some perceptual or observation mistake, or we trusted an authority figure who told us to believe, so we seized it. Now we won't let go. We've got to educate up and coming generations, children, how to think. Not what to think is important, of course, but how to think is even more important, because we're never going to force people to be rational. We have to motivate them, inspire them to be rational, to want to be, because that's the way you lead a safer, a more efficient, productive life. You don't waste your time. You don't waste your money. You don't waste your health, in medical quackery or con artists coming at you and you believe everything they say, politicians who, lie to everybody and people just fall in line. If people understood things like the weakness we have for authority figures, the way we can confuse a desire with reality. All these things can be taught. I've seen it, and sometimes I encourage everyone listening now, I encourage you, don't ever lose hope, because yes, the world seems insane, any day of the week. So many problems, so many people, even at the top levels of government, business, they're just, they're either con artists or it's just pure madness. It can be discouraging, but do not lose hope, because I sincerely believe over the course of my lifetime, I've talked to people around the world. I've debated people, usually not debate, I like to call it a conversation. And I've just, it's not that hard to touch people and to get them to understand that they've got something special in their skull. This 3-pound blob of electrochemical magic, the human brain, is magnificent, but it's also a little crazy. So once you understand that, you can try to maximize the good potential, and you can try to minimize the stumbles and the trip ups in life. You'll never be perfect, but you can do a pretty good job most of the time, and that means something. So, the Asian Humanism Conference, this event, your association, the Filipino Free Thinkers, you guys, I mean, I'm sure you realize it's important, because you wouldn't be, spending your time doing this stuff if you didn't think it was important. But I wonder if you know how important it really is, because the ideals you're promoting, critical thinking, let's make a wiser species, let's make a better world for all. These ideals you're pushing are absolutely essential. They're not nice, We desperately need them. You are the hope for the future. So don't take a day off. Keep doing this stuff, and don't ever lose hope. When you talk to somebody, sometimes it can feel like you're just slamming into a brick wall. It's just a hopeless situation. But trust me, there are people I spoke to 20 years ago who recently have communicated with me, and their thinking is much more in tune with a more likely reality around them. Things do happen. People have to do this stuff at their own pace. So someone that it may seem impossible to reach, try anyway, because you never know when you're planting these seeds, this appreciation for science, an understanding of the limits of science as well. When you're promoting critical thinking, when you're encouraging people to be fully human and to use their mind to the best of their ability, when you do that, you are nudging the world. You're pulling humans to a better place. So please keep that up. I want to just real quick as I wrap up here, I want to tell everybody listening, you guys can email me, guyfeedback@gmail.com, and I'm happy to send you a bunch of tip sheets, flyers. I can email them right back to you that you can share with others. You can just read yourself. It's like, brain tips, how to be a good critical thinker, just easy, one-page items. I've got several of those I can send. So if you send a request to me at guyfeedback@gmail.com, happy to do that. You can also find me on Twitter at Harrison Author on Twitter. Love to connect with people around the world. But I'm here for you, I just gave you my email address. I'm happy to help your organization anytime. And all of you, one more time, let me be a little redundant here. What you're doing is important. It's extremely important, okay? The world needs you. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions.
Wow. Thank you so much, Guy. That was a very inspiring start to this afternoon's discussions. Good. Bravo. And now we have 5 minutes for Guy to take on some questions from the audience. And I do see some on the chat. Red and Tin.
Go ahead, Tin.
Oh, Danny, you can read it from the chat. I'm posting it there.
Oh, okay,
Right.
sure. Here we go. Our first question from Red. How do we best respond to people, anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, etc., who say that they did do their own scientific research and have heard from doctors and scientists who support their non-mainstream position?
Yeah, great question. Real quick answer to that is there's two answers. One is you have to be a practical response is to say, did you really do your research? I believe you did, but first of all, don't argue with them. Try to be on their side, helping to find the truth here with them that feels better for them and you. So, but tell them, say, what were your sources? Were these scientific journals peer reviewed, or is this some, chiropractor with a YouTube channel? Who was your source? Because a lot of people just don't know. They think any medical doctor is an expert on viruses and epidemics, but they're not. They're not virologists necessarily. They're not epidemiologists. That's a very specific thing. You spend a career studying those things. So a general practitioner, for example, there's no reason to expect that kind of doctor to know everything he or she may need to know about an epidemic. So first of all, get that clear, help them out with that. Tell them all sources are not the same. And secondly, just a general thing that applies to the anti-vaccine stuff, always remember you're dealing with emotions. You may think you are being very logical and straightforward and clear, but there's always emotions at play. People, when they have a belief and they're taking a stand, there's emotions involved. And when you come at it and you're trying to chip away at it or flip it, those emotions flare up. They may not show it, but they're there, trust me. Subconsciously, they're feeling attacked maybe, so you've got to appreciate the emotions, maybe even talk about that. Say, a lot of times I'll say, hey, I know it's really hard to change your mind. I've had to do it a few times in life, and it's awkward. You feel like, wow, I was so dumb for so long or something, but there's really nothing dumb about being wrong. It's just dumb when you won't even consider that you're wrong. That's the only dumb thing. So yeah, I would try to kind of get at them that way.
Thank you. Okay. That does make sense. We'll move on to the next question from Pepe from the Philippines. What are some examples of modern scientific research tendencies or directions that you think are particularly dangerous, where we should take extra caution moving forward or not even pursue these directions at all?
That's a great question. Yeah. First of all, I believe it or not, like almost all scientific endeavors need to be done thoughtfully and cautiously, because you can hurt people, you can stumble on a discovery you weren't even looking for. I mean, science, you never quite know what you're going to find when you do it. So always be responsible, cautious, careful. But yeah, right now, obviously the big ones, I would say, artificial intelligence. I mean, it's interesting because it seems so far-fetched. I mean, really, a computer's gonna, take over? But it's probably not so much that a computer will take over. We're not going to have the Terminator scenario. What I'm more concerned about is that certain people, certain governments, certain companies will get AI or something close to it. It's debatable what AI even really is, but some kind of extremely powerful supercomputers that they can then use to exploit us. So it's the people. I'm at this moment right now, I'm more concerned about people with powerful computers than I am powerful computers alone. So yeah, it could happen. The computer could take off on its own and become, we could see the singularity, and it could be the hell scenario where, we're all in trouble. But most likely, as we've already been seeing with social media, it's the humans in the loop with the computers, the algorithms. They're the ones getting us and causing us problems. So yeah, be aware of that. Genetic engineering. I'm so conflicted about genetic engineering because, wow, the idea that you could save a child from tremendous suffering, from some congenital disease or something like that. I mean, how can we resist that? But then I'm concerned we're going to end up with a world where a bunch of blonde, blue-eyed people who can afford, the latest in genetic engineering are going to just skyrocket and, I don't know, have IQs with 200 while, guys like me are just left behind, doing nothing. I don't know. So there's a great movie I recommend, by the way, science fiction movie called Gattaca. Excellent movie, and it touches on a lot of issues in a way that it makes you think. We really could, within decades, not that long away, we could end up with kind of a two caste system, two classes of humans on this planet. One genetically enhanced, super tall, super beautiful, high IQ, athletes and all this. And then there's the rest of us, normal people who are just, kind of inferior to them. I mean, that's not impossible. That could happen. And that would be tragic, because again, the whole idea of humanism, we need to get past these borders, all these walls that we've imagined or created between us. That's the problem. That is the root of so many problems, division. If we were all aware, if we all appreciated how we are in this boat together, we're on this planet together, one young, closely related species, if we could all get that, so many of these problems wouldn't be problems, because we'd be looking out for one another. We would realize, even if you are the super wealthy and you can afford genetic engineering and you've got a supercomputer in your, back pocket, you still don't want to skyrocket past 80% of humanity, because you're part of them, they're part of you. You want to make sure everyone shares, at least roughly shares, in the success of our species.
Thanks, Guy. Okay. All right. So we have one last question in the chat from Darlene from the Philippines. Darlene asks, how do you talk to people who deny facts as "it's my opinion" or belief, or perhaps that they would quote lines in the Bible or other religious scriptures as the right thing?
Yeah, I've a lot of experience with that, I tell you. First rule, be nice if you can, as long as they're not threatening you or something. Be as nice as you can. Remember the emotion thing I spoke of earlier. Nothing gets more emotional than religious belief for many people. So be respectful, this is my opinion, my perspective. There's other ways to do it. Some people ridicule, mock, and that works, for some people. But for me, I'm kind of a nice guy to a fault. I want to get along with everybody. So I try to be very respectful yet piercing. So I will ask questions, like I'm some kind of amateur Socrates. I'll ask questions. I'll say, yeah, but what about this? And then, hey, have you ever read this? What is, and I'll ask questions, I'll ask like, well, what does this passage mean here? Because it sounds to me like they're saying women are just totally inferior. Am I reading it wrong? Help me out, and get them to try to, not defend it, but explain it. Because a lot of times if you have a belief in your head that is likely not true, explaining it to someone can sometimes expose that, especially when that person is sharp and that person is saying, yeah, but what about that? And doing it in a nice way, because it's a way of gently pulling someone into a place where they're actually starting to second guess their belief, and they're starting to reconsider, maybe, even if they don't express it to you. So yeah, one thing that works well, I won't go on too long here, but with religious beliefs, when you are confronted with a religious belief that you feel it just doesn't make any sense, but you probably can't reach that person by pointing out factual errors or contradictions or something like that. But what you can do is just educate them a bit on the real state of religion. We've had, hundreds of thousands of religions, in the last several thousand years. We've had hundreds of millions of gods. We are a God creating species. And just like the race thing I mentioned earlier, there's irreconcilable differences in these religions, these gods. You can't have 10 million soul creator gods who made the earth. There's something wrong there, and you can't have one book that is absolutely true that contradicts another book that is absolutely true. So I would point to other religions and say, yeah, what about those guys? They've been around for a long time too, and I've met many of them, and they're very sincere. They're not mentally ill or anything. They're just like you. They're smart people. They believe this thing. They believe these claims. And so what's going on? What do you think? You tell me, what do you think is going on in their mind? Why are they so convinced? If you're a Christian, why are Hindus so convinced that their religion is factually true? Or Muslims? Or ask a Muslim, what is it about Christians? Why are they so convinced that this is true? Do you think maybe whatever happened to them could happen to you? Maybe, it's something about your enculturation, your family, or it could be psychological phenomena that we all, that happens to all humans. We all have deep questions, and we have these strong desires to have answers, and we all want comfort. It's, space, the universe can seem a little bleak and cold and scary sometimes, and dark. It'd be nice to have someone looking out for you, out there. But when you start to educate people, because it's tragic, but most people, vast majority of people, know nothing about other religions. They just kind of vaguely know, yeah, there's some other people that believe other things. But when you explain to them how many believe this and how many believe that, and that it's almost like a house of cards. And again, you may not get immediate results, but if you're respectful, if you're kind, if you're piercing with your questions and you hit them with, some gentle facts, you may well plant a seed that bears fruit later in that person's life. And keep in mind too, I would encourage you to have good motivations for this stuff. I've never gotten a thrill out of debunking a crazy belief, or of, beating some religious guy in an argument. That doesn't thrill me. What thrills me is the possibility that I can help that person be more clear-minded, live a more sensible life and a safer life, so they're not prejudiced, because of their religion or whatever. They're not harming people. Because even if someone keeps their religion for the duration of their life, you may very well be able to help them take it a little less seriously, to maybe tone it down a bit, so they have at least enough doubt in their mind about their religion that they're not willing to hate someone or to kill someone. If you can just push them back in the mind a little bit, that's doing good. That would make a better world right there, if we could do that to enough people. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer. Sorry about that.
But it was an important answer. And I think some of our speakers later on in the program will be touching on some of those same topics. So everybody, please stick around for that. Okay, so thank you so much for
You're
your
welcome.
time, Guy. And yeah, we hope to see you around in the internet, and we're looking forward to your new work.
Okay, keep up the great work. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Guy. And next we have a message from Philippine Senator Risa Hontiveros, who is known for her tireless work in promoting public health, women's rights, and the welfare of the Filipino family. She's also a very strong advocate of secularism and an ally in the reproductive health work of Filipino freethinkers.
Good day, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and doing well, even amid this pandemic. First of all, let me thank the Filipino freethinkers for letting me be a part of this conference. I commend all of you for promoting and advancing humanist solidarity here and abroad, despite the challenges posed by these troubled times. Present developments in information technology provide us with an opportunity like no other to push forward progressive and humanistic principles and policies, correct injustices, and empower traditionally disadvantaged sectors. However, while Filipinos are highly connected with one another, the digital world has made it easier to traffic in lies, division, and hate, especially along political or religious lines. Intolerance, bigotry, and oppression based on doctrine and dogma are not things of the past. They continue to trample on the rights and welfare of some communities, even in a society that is supposedly democratic and where everybody is supposedly equal. The SOGI Equality Bill, for example, only seeks to guarantee equal rights for persons regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. But uninformed viewpoints continue to deny women, children, LGBTQIA plus persons, and other oppressed individuals our fundamental civil rights. Despite all of these, I am confident of the Filipino people's capacity to accept and promote progressive and humanistic ideas. Even now, our laws give us hope that a humanistic Filipino society is possible. The Philippine Constitution itself is not perfect, but it does provide the basis for making public policies that are not based on any one belief system alone. And of course, we have made significant progress towards pushing laws that protect and promote universal and fundamental rights, which overcame varying objections. The Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act of 2012, or simply the Reproductive Health Law, faced heavy opposition. However, thanks to the hard work of lawmakers, government officials, members of the academe, advocacy organizations like the Filipino Freethinkers, and everyday Filipinos, the RH law was passed into law after so many years. In fact, by next year, the RH law will be a decade old. Humanistic laws in the Philippines are not a matter of if, but a matter of when. This is why I appreciate the work of the Filipino freethinkers and other organizations which are promoting both offline and online free and humanistic ideas to Filipinos from all walks of life. I encourage all of you, continue to speak up and be heard by others. Continue to educate people and in the process learn from other perspectives as well. Continue to engage and build positive connections. Let us not falter. Let us not be afraid. Let us work together for a more humanistic Philippines. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Risa. And if you have questions for Risa, you can leave it in the chat. We'll try to make sure that it gets to her. But yeah, we appreciate that message from her. She's been a constant ally, one of the few very secular and scientific lawmakers in the Philippines, at least. Now, as promised, we'll move into breakout sessions. So I'm assuming that a number of you here, most if not all, are part of one or maybe several humanist organizations. And the issue that we are trying to promote, what the problems that we're trying to solve relate to intersectionality, inclusivity, and other relevant issues. So when we break out into various groups, there will be 3 groups in total, around 10 people per group. The facilitators in the groups will be me and 2 advocacy directors from Filipino freethinkers, very talented and handsome individuals. Their names are Levi and Pepe. So what we're going to do there is we will answer 2 questions, 10 minutes each. People will be encouraged to share their insights. And what are the 2 questions? Number 1, what existing issues related to intersectionality can humanist groups address easily? So think of low-hanging fruit, low effort, high reward, feasible, relatively easy to address problems, or at least easy to improve areas. And everyone hopefully gets around. Like one way that you can do it is people are called one at a time. If they don't want to talk, that's okay. We'll pass it on to the next one. Anyway, I'll leave Levi and Pepe on how they want to facilitate that. And number 2, the question is first, in your group, like maybe through the chat or just by saying it, choose one of the issues identified when you answer the first questions. And then think of solutions. So, what programs, projects, or policies can humanist groups easily implement to meaningfully address or just start to address your group's chosen issue? So number 1, you'll identify a number of issues or problems, maybe around 5 to 10, fewer if you have very common ways of thinking. And then number 2, just choose one and think of a solution, right? Like what we will have at the end of this is a bunch of various problems that groups can look into, and then one concrete way that can be followed through on um, after this conference even happens. So definitely us and the Filipino Freethinkers will be looking at this. The members of the Humanist International Organization, through the notes that we will be sending to them, they'll see these issues and suggestions for solutions as well. So hopefully, like one of the things that come out of this exercise does immediately contribute to a more inclusive and intersectional humanist community. Hope you understood that. Facilitators do break the groups out. So 20 minutes, we will be back in the plenary main room. All right.
Okay, so I'm starting the breakout rooms, but
I'll
the
be
rest will stay
in.
here in the main room
Uh-huh.
and we can
All right.
start the discussion.
Anyway, I see that yeah, Danielle, you're still here. I guess you're part of my group. Some people I know in the chat. Great. So let's start then. Again, I'll repeat question number 1. What existing issues related to intersectionality can humanist groups address easily? So think of low-hanging fruit. Like we want something feasible, like something that can very easily be addressed. So think of problems right now. So problem, put on your problem hats. What is that? Like, is that a black hat or something in the thinking hats? Anyway, I'll call people randomly now. Let's see. Frank,
No,
yeah? No? Okay, I won't call Frank then. Apa, what do you think, Apa, in terms of intersectionality, inclusivity, such issues? What can humanist groups address?
Sorry, I can't think of anything right now. Can you give me more time?
All right, that's
Sorry.
okay. People can
Pass.
it's so people can pass. It's open book. You can even
Okay.
Google ideas if you want. Just type in
I'm
the word.
actually Googling it right now.
Yeah, there you go. Intersectionality. So if you were in the first day last week, we were like Anya Overman's talk on intersectionality raised a bunch of points. Like she specifically spoke about the problems with people like Richard Dawkins, who had very outdated ideas when it comes to women and such things. Uh, like like how to really build safe spaces. That can be one such thing that we address. Like maybe that's what I will uh yeah, like I'll posit that as an area of improvement, like how to improve safe spaces. Like this has been a constant issue that we've been trying to deal with in the online group, in our Facebook group, where we have around 20,000 or so members. I'm not sure if that's still the correct number.
Okay.
We have a very open policy, like a free speech oriented policy. So a lot of people misinterpret that as I can be sexist, I can be racist, I can be misogynist, and things like that. And of course, some people feel unsafe and excluded when they read some of the messages that come from people there. So yep, that's one issue. Oh,
Danny's raising
thank you,
her
thank you.
hand.
Yeah. Go ahead, Danny.
So off the top of my head and in my uh experience dealing with humanist secular organizations in the Philippines, um two issues kind of come up often. Is what Are humanists supposed to engage in politics, and to what degree is it proper for us to engage in that aspect of society? And secondly, what you said about safe spaces, true for marginalized identities. We don't often see the online forums the online forums particularly having safe conversations around it. Uh, I would go so far as to say that we have a lot of edge lords in the secular community that are running amok and are running unopposed because it is supposed to be a clash of ideas. So yeah, the political impartiality of of secular people, that sort of, for a lot of people, translates as political neutrality and apathy. And that one.
So when you said engaging in politics, humanists engaging in politics, what do you mean by this question? Do you mean like running for positions in power? Do you mean like lobbying for certain laws? Do you mean campaigning for certain individuals who are running for positions? Like what exactly do
Um,
you mean here?
More on, I'm thinking lobbying, and then discussions around, is this politician human can this does this politician follow humanist ideals? Is this and something like that. And even in those issue-based discussions, we see conversations being shut down in the form of, we don't talk about politics. And when it starts to veer into legislators, into administrative policies, like there's that idea of talking about, we don't talk about politics because secularism is apolitical.
Right. Thank you so much, Danny. And other folks, in terms of um, more inclusivity, more intersectionality.
Maybe we can hear from Fahima.
Fahima? Yep.
Mm, I think in terms of inclusivity, and one thing which I generally observe, not just even among the religious, is this inability to build allyship with people who don't see eye to eye. I think one of the in order to be able to rally any kind of change, be it climate movement or whatever kind of social changes or certain problems that you see need to be solved generally, there is a need to move people. And that doesn't come just because we are stating opinions or what we think is right or what we think might work. But how it actually would work is when there's a lot of people who are convinced that even if I'm not okay with it, maybe this is good for the society. And that calls for allyship. And allyship doesn't build because we stand on a stage and give a very inspiring speech. It never does. I would help a friend no matter what the friend believes in, simply because the person is a friend. I know the person for very long, right? So I think one thing that's lacking generally across is the ability to build allyship on a very grounded approach of, the fact that I'm very clear what you want, I'm very clear what I want, which comes with a lot of honesty. And very, when I mean honesty, I know what your agenda is, I know what my agenda is. Failing which, then it becomes very difficult. So I think that's one thing people can work towards, building allies. And even if it doesn't turn out to be a good friend in the end, who cares, right? At least there's an ally on, we all want the same thing, maybe different aspects of it, but at least people get the pie. So I think that's one area that seems to be a bit missing. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Maybe
Yep,
we can
definitely.
also hear from Javan.
Hello. All right. For us, in terms of happy, I think one thing that we've always noticed, especially when we do grassroots level kind of work, is about the educational aspect of the people that we're dealing with. I think that all stems down also leads to like vaccine hesitancy, belief in science. Even some people still deny climate change and also still believe that the Earth is flat. I think there's a lot of things that we can do about it. Not just going through about textbook education, but actually trying to instill more interest among, especially young people. Um, who haven't been brainwashed yet or does not have that cognitive biases among themselves. I think it's easier to go beyond our work as humanist organizations to actually pick their interest on science and more into education. Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned there young people, but when you said like the educational aspect, like do you mean like people who don't typically have access to, let's say, college level or even high school level education, like that sort of reaching out to that level, to that sector of community that aren't as fortunate to have that education? Yeah.
Um, I think if we're going to go beyond like college level, I think it's much more difficult, to be honest. Um,
No, I mean
but it is,
younger,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
lower than, yeah,
Mhm.
like
Yeah,
lower than
it is still
college. Yeah.
something that we also have to have them involved as well.
Right.
Especially, the Philippines has more younger population and it makes up, yeah, most of our population. So it's important that we cover that as well.
Okay, so young people, thank you so much, Javan. Other folks who want to add their issues, problems to the mix, like we've identified so far, like several issues from three people who shared their answers. Then what about you? Anything that you think is an low-hanging fruit sort of issue that organizations like HAPI, like Humanist International should be working on?
I think maybe we can choose the issue that we're going to work on next.
Okay, we can actually. So just to summarize for everyone, like we talked about humanists engaging in politics, like lobbying, discussions around even vetting politicians, like whether they're humanists or not. We also talked about safe spaces for marginalized identities in online forums, right? There are too many edgelords in the secular community, according to Danny. Of course, it has to be a free market of ideas, but sometimes people are too excluded because of the some of the polarizing and excluding marginalizing opinions that are posted there. Fahima mentioned the importance of allyship, especially among people you don't see eye to eye with. Like definitely, like not just with people who do not have the same belief system as you when it comes to religion, but also political differences, even scientific differences, right? Like we mentioned, anti-vax, anti-mask. Like that is quite the political issue in many parts of the world right now. When it's really a scientific one, but maybe even the belief in science is now a political issue. But more importantly, how do you truly engage with them and make allies of them rather than the polarization that's already happening where people just put their guard up and no discussion truly happens. Javan mentioned grassroots outreach to young people and because there are a lot of those and also the point that they haven't been brainwashed yet, they can be brainwashed by us. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, we hope to give them the brainwash protection tools so that no one can brainwash them. They can think truly for themselves. So a number of issues have come up, like what do people think is a good thing to discuss next when we talk about solutions. Like we'll have around 6 minutes now, like time flew a bit. So yeah, like if I'm being selfish, I want to talk about the inclusion in online forums because that is a problem that we can immediately apply solutions to, like the edge lords. Is it banning edge lords? Let's see what the solutions are. But anyway, we're still identifying what we want to pick as our problem to focus on. Any other nominations? Yeah, like if you haven't yet, yeah, there's one nomination for the online space inclusivity, right? I think it
So,
sort of
Darlene,
intersects with Fahima's building of allyship too, because if you encounter someone online in your forum, like typically what you do is you like throw them out, like kick them out. But if you consider allyship, like you're a bit more patient with them. So it's kind of contrasting like those two topics. Darlene, then you were saying?
Darlene has a message in the chat: safe spaces and education. I think that has something to do with the online spaces as well.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we use the online as the theme that ties everything together, like online spaces, and then let's think about like allyship and like inclusivity and also yeah like the what Darlene mentioned, safe spaces then like educational spaces online, safe and educational spaces. Yeah, all right. um Cool. Okay, so the like what policies, programs, and projects can we work on to address this issue of improving the inclusivity of online spaces that humanist organizations manage so that it becomes more inclusive, more educational, and at the same time builds allyship, like even with people who are not on the same page yet, right? Because like there's only so much value you can get like preaching to the choir, right? Like impact we can really get when we move, when there's some movement, when people are like on the fence about something and then we push them to the side that's more inclusive, intersectional, and so on. So yeah, what policies, what changes would you like to see in your own organization, right? Like Fahima, Javan, and others here are part of their own organizations. Like, what do you think you'd like to suggest to them to improve the values that we've been mentioning throughout these conversations?
Maybe we can ask Fahima.
Yeah, so I wanted to say one thing. One thing I realized, especially I guess from my perspective, is always the conversation is always between the religious and the non-religious, or the free thinkers and the whatever religion. You see, I don't think communities or religion and no religion, that we can't have that kind of conversation. What conversation can happen is usually between a person and a person, right? So what needs to happen is, first, in order for me to start working with a group of people, I need to know who are the persons in it. I need to break down. I need to know there's a Daniel, or I need to know there's a Red Thani. And a lot of times, what organizations don't do is, allow the opportunity for people to learn about every individual in that group. So these people stories don't come out. When I don't know who is there and what they are in terms of what they like, it's a bit difficult, because I've been in a groups where, and trust me, I've been in groups where I'm the only Muslim girl among the Jews. I'm the only Muslim girl among the Christians, and probably now I'm the only Muslim girl among the free thinkers. And many times I grapple to know, who am I talking to? Maybe this person, minus of everything, it's a fellow Harry Potter fan. And that one understanding of that characteristics will actually make me very close to that person, and that can create dramatic change in how our relationship moves. And when the two of us are very close, almost in a way, the communities itself will, our communities navigate around that. So I think a lot of times, what organizations need to do on the good days, because you see, they only come together when they spot a problem, but on the good days, on the green days, they need to start I need to know who is in Filipino free thinkers. I probably say yes because I knew Daniel for a very long time. We basically are connected through social media. I see what she posts. Definitely the two of us, what we post would be based on our own rational reasons and beliefs, but that connectivity is very important. So I think until people move from organization and purpose to really understanding not just people but persons, I think that's the first move. And that also leads to I really love what Darlene said, the safe spaces and education. Because it's only safe for me when there's faces I'm not just familiar with, but I really want to stick around with. So yeah, that's what I think.
Maybe we can also hear from Garrick.
Yeah, I'm reminded of this sort of program that they do among subreddits on Reddit, where they sort of do like a cultural exchange program, because certainly like LGBT spaces and non-free thinker spaces already exist, right? And it's kind of, it would be sort of a wasted effort if we were to try to get more people from LGBT spaces, from non-free thinker spaces ourselves, but where these communities already exist, right? So yeah, one thing that we could do is like invite, or like do like a cultural exchange. Other organizations can come to our online spaces, and then they can talk about their organization, and then we'll do that in their space, and then just sort of like see what kinds of relationships we can build off of something like that.
And then a final answer before we go back to the plenary. The 20 minutes flew by faster than I expected, but all of the ideas mentioned so far are quite exciting to me, and I want to like build on that. Luckily, we have a subredditor here for that idea. Any final ideas from the group before we go back? I think people are actually already going back into this room, right? Then
Yes.
I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Uh, that's good. That's good.
Darlene also
Anyway,
agrees with intercultural exchange.
yeah, that's definitely it all ties together. Thank you so much, all of you, in the plenary group, and now we're welcoming everyone back. So room and room one still have 6 and 7 people in there. So yep, how do we close all the rooms now? Or are
They're
people
closed
already
now.
back in?
They're
Ah,
already
okay,
back.
there,
Yeah.
there,
Looks like
already,
Levi's
all.
asking for an extension. I don't think we have the time.
Yeah, I don't
But
think so.
question. So I started my own timer now for 5 minutes. So to the first question, here are some of the answers. So humanists engaging in politics, lobbying, discussions around whether we vet whether politicians are humanists or not, safe spaces for marginalized identities, particularly in online forums, like the problem of edgelords in secular community was mentioned. And then we talked about allyship among people who don't see eye to eye as well. We talked about doing grassroots outreach to young people, to people through education, especially to people who haven't been indoctrinated or enculturated yet into a fixed sort of mindset. We also talked about how it's important to know persons and individuals and not just the categories that they belong to, giving opportunities for this kind of knowing of individuals like will make people feel safe and build connectivity. And it's especially important to focus on these opportunities and not just too much on the problems and be fully driven by the problems. And we also actually I jumped a bit now to the solutions, right? Sorry about that because it a bit overlapped in the conversation. So we picked as our issue the online spaces, in particular, in inclusivity in online spaces like forums. And here are the solutions that the group suggested. So one is to make sure that individuals within the group know each other apart from just whether they're religious or not, whether they're Muslims, Christians, whether they're scientific or not. Like maybe it's important to know like what favorite Harry Potter book um, they have, or other such rapport building things on the good days will make people feel safer when they have more difficult conversations rather than being in a room with strangers. So I think this is the concept of finding what you have in common, so that when you talk about things that make you different, it becomes easier. And there was also a suggestion that was inspired by Reddit, where several subreddits had a cultural exchange program. Like the idea is that, for example, the free thinkers reach out to an LGBT organization, or specifically, let's say, a bi organization, and do a cultural exchange where you invite speakers from that group to an AMA maybe, and then you as an atheist or an agnostic go into that bisexual group and do an AMA for them, and whatever other cultural exchange activities that you can have. And the idea is that you partner with them and acknowledge their existence too, because instead of just looking for individuals within your group who have those identities, there are already existing movements that you can interact with, right? And I'm reminded of something we did very early where we talked to Strap, like a trans gender organization, and we did that sort of cultural exchange where we explained to them what free thinking was, and they explained to us what being transgender meant for them. And yeah, so that is it. Anything that I missed from our group? By the way,
No.
those ideas, thank you so much, Garrick, Fahima, Javan, and Danny, for sharing those ideas, and to the others as well who listened in. And I'm sure you also had some ideas brewing. You're still welcome to add them in the chat, by the way. But anyway, my 5 minutes are up, and I will pass it now to my co-facilitator in the middle, Levi.
Levi, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. So we only, I'm sorry to say, we only did step one of the three that you prescribed. So we discussed the issues, and so discrimination, like, so the issues that came up were discrimination in general. This is a problem particularly prevalent in poor areas, and this leads into violence against women and LGBT and so on and so forth. And then another issue was the effect of climate change in the Philippines, specifically in rural areas, because rural areas tend to be, on the very edges of the country, or any country for that matter. And because of less infrastructure, you end up with, they're more susceptible to disasters. And so with a lack of kind of secularism, you end up with people who view disasters as punishment for some kind of sin or something like that, and then climate science becomes ignored, and you end up with a whole bag of problems. And finally, we talked about superstitions, and that while the name itself sounds almost like innocuous, almost harmless, there are some very real issues in other parts of the world outside of like the Philippine experience, where human sacrifice is actually being practiced. And this is something that needs legislation, that needs basically attention. So we cast a vote, and we in particular, I think the climate change thing resonated with the group, and there's quite a bit of overlap with everything else, because a lot of it is secularism, right? And rational thinking, but that is where we ended. That is where the time went up.
So it points to the difficulty of solving climate change as a problem. We can't even start to talk about. Anyway, thank you so much, Levi's group. And actually, maybe we could touch on that a bit. Also, people are welcome to add their solutions in the chat. All right, Pepe, go ahead. You're next. What did your group talk about?
All right. So in my group, we for question number 1, like what existing issues related to intersectionality can humanist groups address easily? So we looked for like certain areas and communities wherein we could contribute. Some areas that we looked at were science education. Another one was mental health, and the other one was gender identities and gender inequalities. And so we discussed a bit about like what the problems here are. In particular, with science education, we talked about addressing education of children earlier rather than later, like targeting younger children and making sure that they learn critical thinking and scientific thinking earlier, because like I think that the returns on that are much higher than trying to catch it later on in life, when the curiosity has been burned out of them by the educational system. But tying into that, we also discussed how the curiosity is being burned out of children by the educational system, primarily by standardized testing and the method by which learning is measured in children, right? Junior in particular had special insight because he teaches public school, and he mentioned how it's really better to evaluate children not through like rote memorization tests, where after they get the grade they just toss all of that knowledge aside. Instead of doing that, we should aspire to like kindle their curiosity, and make sure that they can explain, they understand why the answers are these ways and so on, and they can explain how they get to these answers. So that's one thing about science education. The other things we looked at were gender inequality. So Sim mentioned that we could look at gender identities and inequalities. In gender inequality, there's a lot of stuff about abortion and contraception, which are like not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but we can definitely look at um, campaigns against, for example, domestic violence and discrimination against women, like at on a widespread level, um, and making sure that like our stances here are clear, and that people know that they have these allies in us. Um, there's also, we looked at the last one was mental health, with something I brought up, and this one involved um, educating people about like basic emotional hygiene or emotional like first aid, quote unquote, and at the same time making sure that mental health facilities are available to most people. And um, I guess it ties into a bit of debunking a little bit of outdated ideas about mental health, and how, for example, like, oh, um, you should just stop being angry or stop being sad. Why? Why is this a problem? Not realizing this is due to like a chemical imbalance in the brain that can be, can be addressed with therapy or certain medication, right? Um, so these things are what we discussed. I think the thing we focused in on more in number 2 was the education one, and in particular, um, maybe it might be helpful to find um, people in our networks who teach, and connecting those who, because they might just be existing thinking like I'm the only one trying to get my kids evaluated properly and trying to get them properly curious instead of just doing rote memorization, and finding a way to like connect them so that we can build like a grassroots movement to move away from standardized testing and start building up this paradigm of more holistic critical thinking evaluation for student education, for science education. I think that's it. That's it from our
All right.
our
Thank you so much, Pepe, Levi, and everybody who contributed to the conversations. Yeah, a round of applause for ourselves and for everyone here. The notes, by the way, are being taken by our documenter, Tao. Thank you so much, Tao. I mentioned this because there are a bunch of very good ideas that we can follow through on, and we will publish the notes to this session and the other sessions after the event. So we're not sure yet how many days that will be, but do check back on the website every hour to find out. All right, back to you then, Danny.
Thanks for your reports, Red, Levi, and Pepe, and thank you everyone for your insights. Okay, so while we're still in a problem-solving mood now, we're going to hear from 3 humanist advocacy leaders. Our speakers have 10 minutes each to present their areas of expertise and answer a couple of questions from the audience. If your question doesn't make it to the time limit, no worries, there will be a longer Q&A portion after all the speakers have finished with their presentations, so hold on to those questions. Okay, so our first speaker is from the Philippines and will be speaking on the topic of humanism and climate change. He has been heavily involved in national and regional environmental conservation, climate justice, human rights, and civic engagement advocacy since 2012, and is currently the Young Humanists International coordinator and social media consultant for Humanists International, as well as being the CEO of Humanist Alliance Philippines International. Please welcome our first speaker, Mr. Javan Poblador.
Hi everyone, thank you all for coming and also for inviting me. Today's topic is very close to me. Before being active or being centered in the humanist movement, I've spent many years on conservation work. So talking about the climate is something that I'm still passionate about. But I'm not going to bore you with scientific facts, data, or overwhelm you with information about the climate crisis. I mean, you can always look it up on the internet if you want to. But instead, I'll be focusing on 2 stories this afternoon. So this two stories I'll be telling you about are the stories of Sabina. Next slide. Sabina and Kumar. Might not be their real names, might not be their real photos, but I can assure you that these are very real stories. So starting with Sabina, next slide. Sabina is an 11-year-old girl from Afghanistan. Well, we all know that life isn't easy in Afghanistan. Sabina's mom is estranged from her husband and lived with her brother before he was killed in a Taliban attack. The mother depended on his brother's family for additional support, but they were farmers, and the country was facing severe drought amidst the violence. And without water, wheat, maize, and other crops would not grow. They left their home seeking food, work, and safety, but even still, they faced fraught decisions. In February, next slide, Sabina was betrothed to a man nearly twice her age in exchange for flour, rice, and cash to sustain her family in the coming years. Sabina, thin and soft-spoken, did not protest the decision. I mean, what choice does a little girl have for their survival? It's either her marriage or their funerals. Now, shifting our focus to Nepal, next slide, where we meet Kumar. Now, Kumar is also is a 13-year-old boy, but like Sabina, doesn't also have the luxury in life. Also belonging to a farm household, Kumar's family suffered greatly after the April 2015 7.8 magnitude earthquake in Nepal, and the changing rainfall patterns pushed them in the corner even further. Kumar was forced to stop going to school. The agriculture sector was no longer reliable for them, and they had to be seasonal migrants to find new work. And you'd think stopping school was worse. Kumar had to support his father and work in a brick kiln industry at a young age, along with other 28,000 children that also worked there, to pay off family loans for their survival. Kumar is subjected to very harsh working conditions, not very suitable for a child anyway. Two stories in two countries across the world, but one thing that links them together. They are all impacts of the climate crisis. What most people think about the climate crisis are the direct effects, like rising sea levels, acidification of the ocean, coral bleaching, and biodiversity loss. But we now know the impact runs deeper than that. Some children are married off at such a young age without even knowing what it means to be a child. Dreams of young kids cut short to pay off family loans and subjected to harsh working conditions. How many more other Sabinas and Kumars are currently suffering right now? How many other untold stories of people suffering from the climate crisis that we just don't know yet? But despite the doom and gloom, hope is not lost. The 1.5 degrees Celsius warming limit is still achievable if there's a strong global action and we act faster. It's not a question anymore of whether climate change is real or not. There's no debate about it. It is real. But the question is, will we actually do anything about it? The solutions are right there. We know what to do. A huge piece of the climate solution lies in cutting down our greenhouse gas emissions and divesting from fossil fuels. But there are many pieces of the jigsaw, like addressing agriculture, environmental conservation, and the choices we make every day. And as for us humanists, we have a moral duty to both speak out and act while we can. As humanists, we also recognize our dependence and responsibility for the natural world. And we also know that we have a duty of care to all humanity, and that includes future generations. Knowing what we know now, it would be wholly irresponsible or even reckless to ignore what is happening. And here's what I think. I think the ultimate evil is knowing what's wrong and looking away when you know you can make a difference. Yes, it's a long shot and it calls for the cooperation of every person on the planet. The talk about the climate crisis, it is filled with doom and gloom. However, if there's one thing that we can hold on to, it's that our response to the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that drastic changes for the better are possible. And there have also been success stories in the past, but we can no longer afford any more delay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Javan. Those were two sobering stories about the impacts the climate crisis makes on human life on a very intimate level. So at this point, we still have time for a question or two. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Danny, I thought the question is after.
Oh, okay. All right then. So if we'll be having questions after all of the speakers have finished speaking, then we'll move on to our next speaker. Okay, so we've been touching on science education heavily from day one, which is something our next speaker has plenty of experience with. He is the National General Secretary of the Federation of Indian Rationalist Associations, or FIRA, the Secretary for International Cooperation at Maharashtra and Shahada Nirmulan Samiti, or MANS, and a professor of chemistry with 29 years of teaching experience. In 2020, he was given the Humanists International Distinguished Service to Humanism Award in recognition of his 31 years of contributions to organized humanism. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Sudesh Godarao from Maharashtra State, West India, to talk about humanism and science.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for the nice words. And I congratulate all the organizers from the Filipino Freethinkers for organizing this wonderful Asian Humanism Conference. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So basically, I am going to introduce my organization, the kind of work we are doing in our state, and at the same time, what are the work is done by the Federation of Indian Rational Association to some extent. And my focus will be on not truly on the science, but actually on the scientific temper or the scientific outlook, which is required as far as the well-being of the humankind is concerned. So in the beginning of the 21st century and at the new millennium, everyone is aware of the need to be able to think with an open mind and to lead a rational life. The Maharashtra Andhashraddha Nirmula Samiti or the Maharashtra Blind Faith Eradication Committee, it's a voluntary organization working through more than 350 branches located in the rural and the urban state of the Maharashtra. Along with, we have got some branches in the other neighboring states like the Belgaum in the Karnataka and in Goa too and in Delhi also. It does not receive the foreign or the government funding, and so it's a people's movement working completely on the support of the people and for the people. The Maharashtra state has a long legacy of rationalists and social reformers who always took an objective and informed stand against the superstition. The Constitution of India has stipulated adoption of scientific outlook as one of the responsibilities of every Indian citizen and has included it as a value to be inculcated through the education. The MANS has resolved to further this rational legacy through purposeful activities and the programs. The eradication of blind faith can be achieved by the following mentioned 5 main aims and objectives of the MANS. The first important principle or the objective of MANS is to oppose and hesitate against harmful superstitions and rituals which misguide and exploit common people. The number 2 principle is to inculcate and propagate scientific outlook, skepticism, humanism, and critical thinking. And the number 3 principle is to encourage constructive and critical analysis of the religion, traditions, and the customs. Number 4 principle is to make meaningful the heritage of the saints and the social reformers and the values of the constitution. And the last principle is to associate and work with the progressive social reform organizations at the national and at the international level too. Now to look upon the scientific temper or the scientific outlook, you know that the superstitions are caused by many obstacles in the human progress till man invented the scientific outlook that cleared his vision and illuminated the path of the progress. He found a new way of looking at happenings around him. So it says there is a cause behind all that exists or happens. So the human intellect can grasp this cause, and some causes may not be attributed for a while, but the man knows the way to find them, and this is the most reliable way of acquiring and enhancing knowledge. Whatever a person has to suffer is not the making of a god, or not his fate, or not the time of his, her, or her birth, or the sins submitted in the earlier births. Committed in the earlier births. There is always a cause behind the exploitation of any person which can be diagnosed, established, and remedied. However, when an attempt is made to draw attention to these exploitative superstitions and remedy to them, even those at the receiving end of the exploitation, they may ask you a question: who gave you the right to make these abrupt changes in our lives? Or they may also ask you a question: does your science knows everything? So to be able to answer such questions, the activist should understand the philosophy of the social change that suppose the scientific temper or the outlook. Although it is not possible to remove all the obstacles in the path of the progress of the humankind, one can certainly light the path and cautiously avoid the pitfalls. Past history tells us that the man had to face such innumerable obstacles and pitfalls till the thought of scientific outlook struck him and lighted his path. We know the famous example of the astronomer Copernicus, who profiled two theories: one that the Earth and all planets revolve around the sun, and the second that the Earth rotates on its own axis from east to west and completes a full rotation in a one day. This turned the cause-effect relation between the sun and the earth and the planets, as was spelled out in the Bible, upside down. The Bible had said that all this is caused by the will of the Father in the heaven. So the people did not take notice of the Copernicus theories then. But when the Bruno confirmed the Copernicus theory, he was burnt alive, and Galileo had to beg for pardon for experimentally confirming the truth. But this proved to be the beginning of a new age of the science. It enabled man to discard the religious theories of the God, destiny, or the Hindu religious theories of the Praktan, Prarabdha, or the Karma Vipak Siddhant, we call it. For the first time, man became independent of the word, the book, and the omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent God controlling every human thought and his actions. It gave a man a new self-assurance and confidence. The scientific outlook has blessed the humanity with three more boons. In India, women and underprivileged section of the people, generally called as the Dalits, were not allowed to acquire any knowledge. But this new way of thinking was available to them, irrespective of their caste, creed, and the gender. Secondly, the science does not claim to possess answers to all questions and to know the ultimate truth, whereas it is claimed by the so-called the religion. Thirdly, so far, there is only one means or technique available to mankind of getting valid knowledge, and that is the scientific outlook. It has proved that whatever the knowledge becomes accessible to mankind will be through the scientific outlook and not through the revelation. In simple words, the scientific outlook means believing anything to the extent of the evidence available for it. The constituents of scientific outlook are the observation, reason, inference, verification, and the experimentation. The scientific outlook is not a mere mathematical process, but it's a core containing human values. Those values are nothing but the modesty, independence, exactitude, and the fairness. The few reasons why scientific outlook is not spread and it is not deep-rooted into the Indian society, maybe I can highlight some more reasons. The first reason is the caste system and the subordination of women. This system debarred women and Dalits from acquiring any kind of the knowledge. The caste psychology emerges from the dishonest logic of determining an individual status by his birth. So it hampers the advancement of the scientific outlook that is based on the reason and the experiment. The second reason is the philosophy that the invisible Brahma alone is true and all the visible material or the world is illusionary. The third reason, the age-old system of education that does not encourage asking questions. The fourth one is dictatorship in the family. The fifth one is idolization of individualisms and avoiding criticizing them out of the reverence. And the last one is the lack of progressive movements. So all these are the 6 reasons why the scientific outlook is not existing in the almost all the society. So to have this scientific outlook, India had a long tradition of independent thinkers who propounded their own theories. Like the zero was conceived in India and the mathematics progressed by leaps and bounds all over the world. Nagarjuna, a renowned chemist, discovered how to make mercury compound. Aryabhatta had proffered the theory that the earth revolves around the sun 1,000 years earlier than the Copernicus and Varamir knew ages before that the sun is a star. Though this knowledge was derived from the observation, investigation, exploration, scrutiny, discourses, use of elementary mathematics, and the genius of those ancient scholars, but it was yet not the scientific outlook as we see it today. These are the reasons why this tradition disappeared without developing into the modern scientific outlook. So the such factors as the caste system, subordination of women, restriction on the propagation of knowledge, prohibition of independent thinking, validity of and reverence for the world and the book, and neglecting dignity of the labor stop not only the spread of knowledge but also stop the rational free thinking altogether. So there is a faith that the material world that we see and experience is the Maya, not real but the illusion. So our education system also discourages inquisitiveness. Asking questions on the part of the students is seen as an affront to his teachers or the elders. Idolization has become so rampant in our society that self-respect is replaced by the pride and arrogance. Criticism is impossible as it is construed as insult or abuse. Because of the intolerance, the individual and the society has become oversensitive and aggressive. To add to this tense, volatile situation, there are many religions, each with many sects and deities or hallowed saintly persons and multitudes of their worshippers.
Excuse me, Dr. Sadesh.
Yes, I'm concluding, last 1 minute. So another and more important reason is the lack of political strength and will that can strengthen out the fabric of the disorderly society. We are not prepared to give up the obsolete, senseless, and exploitative customs and traditions, or even to re-examine them. So the Constitution of India mentions that it is a duty of every Indian citizen to inculcate scientific outlook And for that, we have to strive hard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudesh, for your insights. And yes, MANS is doing important work when it comes to social reform. Incredibly challenging, especially considering the Indian context, but important. And now I'd like to call on our last speaker for today. So last week, we scratched the surface of Singapore's unique dynamics when it comes to interbelief harmony. And today we'll hear more on the topic of humanism and interfaith relationships from someone who has made social harmony activism her life's work. Our last speaker hails from Singapore. She is the founder and president of hash.peace, an organization that has specialized in facilitating interethnic and interbelief interactions, as well as raising awareness about religiously motivated extremist and exclusive ideologies since 2015. Please welcome to the screen Ms. Nazhat Fahima.
Hi everyone, nice to be here. It was good to hear the other speakers. So basically, as Daniel introduced me, my name is Fahima. I'm from Singapore. HAPI is really a youth led advocacy group. So what we focus on is advocating sustainable social harmony in Singapore. So we do this by catalyzing inter-ethnic, inter-belief, intercultural discussions, dialogues at a grassroots level. That's what we do. The idea behind the work I do is really one conversation at a time. Of course, when I started it, it sounded quite impractical and quite absurd to think that you can change the world by having one conversation at a time. But I think over time, you come to realize the power of these one conversations at a time, because you realize the idea of how when you talk to one person, you're not just talking to one person, you're talking to that person and the people in his world. So the idea of, changing my world, changing the world really came from changing my world, who's around me, the 2 to 3 degrees of network around me. So a lot of the work that I do, what I advocate is not so much about, learning about the race or the religion or, the belief system or what. Trust me, I think nobody in their lifetime can understand. I'm Muslim, and trust me, I still grapple to understand Islam itself. So what more a person who's not from there, not familiar with it, or even disagrees with it? It's not possible, right? But what is humanly possible, what is practical, what is necessary is to understand the multi-faces of people. So what do I understand about multi-faces of people? When you look at me and let's say, if I talk to a person who's atheist, agnostic, non-religious, whatever the term, secularist, and the first thing that they notice, because they come from a free thinking or an atheist belief, the first thing, if they look at me and they think I'm Muslim, and that's all the category they're going to plant in me, then that's a bit difficult to go to the next step. What they need to know I'm a Marvel fan from the days of the comics to all the way. And they need to know I couldn't stand Eternals for a start. They need to know I cried when Iron Man died. They need to know I'm a Harry Potter fan. They need to know I'm from a coastal town in Tamil Nadu. There's so many faces of me. They need to know I'm all into science fiction. I'm all into space myth. People need to know all these multi faces of just me. And I think many times, when trying to understand communities, what we tend to overlook is that communities is really an entire entity made of a lot of subunits, and those subunits are usually disregarded, and that's when we apply a homogeneous feel to it, and it's not rational to do so. Even in the world of science, where scientists can't agree with each other on theories and stuff, and there are still a lot of arguments and debates about various approaches to science, and the same parallel happens in the religious world, where people can't accept each other's versions of religion or religion itself. I think what needs to happen is the fact that people need to understand a lot more deeper about each person. even I tell this to people, just because they know a Fahima doesn't mean that they will understand the Muslim community, because my Islam could be very different from another person's Islam. Even within my family, there is a lot of us who have our own ways of, applying the religion or, adopting it. And, it's not just about we anchor and we fuss about the belief, what they believe. Is it rational? Does it make sense? Is it real? Is there truth behind it? There's so much of fuss about it that kind of sometimes, disadvantages us, because we do not try to understand or empathize with why I anchor my life around the idea of religion, this religion. To some people it could be scriptures, to some people it could be belief, to some people it could be family, and to some people, for me personally, I generally like the whole idea of Abrahamic faiths and a lot of the prophets, and I anchor towards it. So when we don't empathize with what each belief means for people, it becomes a bit difficult to even start having a dialogue. There's a lot of discomfort. In my work, I've had moments where I'm the other in the room. In a room full of Jews, I'm the only Muslim. In a room full of Catholics, I'm the only Muslim. And many times in the room full of humanists, atheists, I'm the only person in the religion. And, and very rarely have I felt uncomfortable. That's because usually in that room, I do have my comfort space. The entire room might not be comfortable because people know me, but there's always that one or two people that I kind of have known for a very long time. I've created a trust or a bond. So for example, here, the face that I will look at is Danielle, because I know her for so long. We have this virtual relationship, and she knows what I talk online. I see what she says online. We've been together, I think, in Singapore. So, and in Singapore itself, with the Humanist Society, definitely people like TJ, I think he was a speaker recently. So all these individual faces give me a comfort, and that kind of comfort creates a safe space for me. And over the years, I have learned to sit through and listen to almost anything. So in a room where people are just talking about how, for example, the religion doesn't make sense, how can people think like that? Is there rational to it? Is there reason to it? I do listen to it. And do I want to respond to it? No, not at that point of time. I can't address a crowd full of people who have different ideas about, whether or not certain things make sense or not. I can't explain my feelings, because even I grapple with understanding what is faith to me. Like for me personally, and I speak not on behalf of any other people, for me is I anchor to religion because that's my worldview, and that's what I kind of contemplate with based on what I think is existence. And where do I pick it from? I pick it from my family. So a religion itself is not like, it's a belief that we stick to because, there's truth to it. Maybe there are people, but to many ordinary people, I think it's just the fact that it is a whole community, it's a family, there's a lot of social relationship to it, which we need to understand. Likewise, I think on this side, people who have certain religious beliefs need to also understand where people come from when they don't subscribe to such kind of beliefs. And that can only happen through human channels. And it has not been effective for me when there's a lot of people in a room and we're all talking about it, because to me, it's like, I still feel if there's 5 people in the room, there's 5 ways of looking at it, and it's not effective. But what helps is when there's 1 or 2 and everybody's aligned, then each day, one conversation, you meet different kind of humanists, you meet different kind of religious people, you meet different kind of Muslims, and you start to see the spectrum of how people look at things. And eventually what this does to you, and I think this is again another neglected part in interfaith relationships or even intersectionality, is the language. In order to have a dialogue with me, we need to be at some point speaking the same language. And it's not just about, linguistics. It's not about whether it's everybody speaking English. Sometimes people could be speaking the same language and yet the communication is not there, because in language, there's a lot of culture, there's a lot of life experience that one attaches to their language. So sometimes in order to talk to a person, you need to know whether the both people are speaking in the same language, in the same length, of the same understanding, and have the same intention. So when you don't have that kind of setting, no matter what safe space, you will feel very frustrated because you're trying to get the person to accept something, and the person is not even ready to accept. The person did not come to the conversation to accept. So even in my case, I liked what Guy said just now, I like what Guy Harrison said, the whole thing about, being respectful, being really approachable. I don't think I want to walk into a dialogue and have a person trying to give me a whole list of facts and science about whether God exists. I'm not interested in that conversation on that day. If I want to have that conversation, I will choose who I want to have conversation with. I do have that conversations. People I know for 3-4 years, people who are comfortable with me, people I think we need to exchange that. Because I'm curious, you're curious, there has to reach a level. I don't think many times when I've talked to people, I don't think people want to just give the rights and the space to anybody who's willing to come with a very specific objective. We are not human projects or experiments. We are people. And how we engage with people affects our life experience and eventually how we have a worldview, right? So I think at the end of the day, it is really about interfaith, especially when it intersections with humanism. What is interesting is, all your 10 commitments of humanist value, trust me, it's there. Everybody who's not religious will agree with it. Take, for example, one of your commitment is humility. I think, Islam has it. We call it hikmah. You have critical thinking. Of course, there's critical thinking. A lot of the Quranic verses were revelation based on questioning. They went to Prophet, asked a question, and therefore there was a revelation. Of course, whether the revelation, the source of it, whether or not, there's the two sides agree, that's another side of the story. But there is every value that the humanist world or humanists hold on to. It really applies to me, which is why I always tell my humanist friend, I'm definitely a humanist. There's no argument to that. I'm just maybe a different humanist from many people there. So I think it's about it's far beyond on just trying to classify and categorize people. It's about come to the table because you need to understand Fahima first. When you understand me, you understand where I come from, you understand what I believe in, then move on to the next person. And eventually you actually understand the community. And that understanding of the community that you have is more real because you have walked the ground. You did not absorb just what's on the books and then come to the table as, oh, okay, I want to talk to you. And also another thing before I wrap up is, I know some of us have bad experiences. There might be certain leaders or certain communities that have been very discriminating, prejudiced. They might have even be taken violent. But we must, on both ends, or every perspective, try to tear ourselves away from the prejudice of the negative situation, because then you will not be able to move subsequent conversations. You will always impose that negative idea on whoever's coming forth to you. So that is something you need to, and that's when being in your own echo chamber where it can heal you is important, as opposed to aggravating you more of the negativity. So, yep, that's all from me, and open to questions.
Thank you so very much for your insights, Fahima. It is definitely easier to talk about difficult topics with people you trust and consider friends. So really, that rapport is important. Okay, so at this stage in the program, we have about 10 minutes for the speakers to answer some questions in the chat. All right.
So first question is for Javan from Red. What do you think individuals can do to help hold big corporations and governments accountable for their climate impact, especially amid moves to overly focus blame on individual responsibility?
It is very true and also very difficult on talking about this aspect. That's why in doing talks about the climate, I shift away telling younger kids, to avert climate crisis, you need to plant trees, you need to do this and that. The solutions are not that anymore. Like, no matter how much we plant trees, but if we're emitting the same amount of greenhouse gas like we currently do, we're not doing anything at all. We're chasing our tails there. And also focusing on how individuals can help the climate crisis is convenient for these corporations. Now, as individuals, sadly, there's not much we can do, but together, though, collective actions, that's where we need to bank on. If we really wanted to do something about the climate crisis, we definitely first need to put the right leaders in our governments who listen to the science, listen to who prioritizes climate policies. That's very important. We also need to have leaders who listen about bringing our concerns, especially here in the Philippines, where we emit like 0 point something greenhouse gas emissions every year, but yet we're the most vulnerable to the climate crisis. But we need leaders who also hold other nation leaders accountable, especially on COP26, which was apparently a disappointment. But we have to do it though, no matter how hopeless it may seem. We still have to do it while we can, because we're definitely fighting for our future. And on a local level, there has been success stories, which is something that we also need to take note of. Like for the Humanist Alliance Philippines International, or HAPI, we've had some mobilizations within the cities. We've managed to prevent a corporation from establishing a coal plant within the city in Bacolod that was led as well by one of our members. And also in Dumaguete, we've managed to influence our local leaders to make the province a coal-free province. So there are things that we can do locally, but it needs the help of everyone. You ask ourselves, there's not much, unfortunately, that we can do, but with collective action and with the cooperation of everybody, then yes, the impact is massive.
Thank you, Javan. And next question is for Fahima. What is the one of your most inspiring stories where you were able to connect with someone you never imagined you could meaningfully connect with? How did you make it work?
Okay, so there was this instance once I was talking to this. So I shared something on Facebook, about one of my interfaith work, and once in a while I get people messaging me. Some, even within religion, some of them will not agree with interfaith work. Okay, so I posted something about it, and then after a while, for a moment, somebody was we got into a discussion, and it just went a little bit too heated, and the person was trying to convince me that this particular group of religion, or this religion, people from this religion are our enemies, and they quoting all the verses and stuff. And I'm talking to someone from my own religion, by the way, so it's not even another religion. The person is trying to convince me, and here I am. I'm not really so expert in my Quranic knowledge or anything, so I'm amateur, I'm a lay person, and I'm trying to how do I deal with this person, and clearly we're supposed to be the same, but not same. I tell you, what's difficult. What's easy is same, different. That's easy. Same, not same is a very difficult thing to deal with. And I'm trying to convince this person, no. Then there came a point in the conversation where what I don't want to do is push the person away by saying anything equally rude and rebellious or anything. I think it's very important for me to keep the connection of this person, right? So there came a point where I said, look, have you met a person from this particular religious community? Have you met them? And the person has never met anyone from that community. So basically the person is he's talking based on the knowledge that has been put into him. So I made it a point to say that you might be a fellow brother based on our belief, but it is very important for me to maintain and give high most regard to the relationship of the persons next to me, even if they are not from the same religion. I had to anchor that, and that's the part I can be very bold about. I said I can't, because these people are with me, they care about me. I have a duty towards them to care about them as well. So you have to anchor that, and that's where the principles of humanity must stand. That's when it transcends your belief, right? So I had to do that, and I told the person, let's take a year. Why don't you look for someone from that religious community, get to know them, and then come back. I think our 1 year ends next year in March. So we said, let's come back again after 1 year. Let's come back, and then why don't we see what you think about it? Just connect to one human being from there, and tell me what you think, and then we'll move on from there. But I think what I learned personally, when to put a pause to that conversation and take back. And I told him also, I will go back and read all the verses that he mentioned. I'll read the history of it. I'll read the interpretations of it. I will read the Tamil, English, and Arabic, all the versions of it. I will also do that. And I think you need to know when to pause the conversation, because at that point of time, the two of us needed education and reflection on our own. On my case, I felt he needed more, because what he was espousing hit. Right. And I also needed to be educated as to where is this person coming from? What was the reason he's talking like that? Did he really face anything? And yeah, so we went back to educate, and hopefully next year he would come back to talk. And I think that was one life-changing. It definitely taught me how to put a pause and have a bit of empathy for the person and give the person the opportunity, as opposed to just cancel the person saying that, oh, you're a hate-mongering person, I don't want to talk to you, please get out of the door. I think I'm quite proud of myself for not doing that. So yeah, I think that's life-changing.
Thank you, Fahime. And last question for Dr. Sudesh. Please answer very quickly as we're running out of time. What can people outside South Asia do to help with the problems of superstition, sexism, the caste system, etc. in your context?
Yeah, that's a very good question by Red Tanny. So about all the problems which may be associated with the superstition, maybe with the sexism or the caste system, what I can say is that all these problems are because of the lack of proper knowledge, because of the lack of scientific temper. So if this scientific temper is inculcated in the society, whether it is an ascetic society or any part of the world, I think the problems can be very clearly solved. And for that particular purpose, to inculcate the scientific temper, it has to be inculcated right from the academia, I can say. The school curriculum, if they teach a proper science, and if the scientific temper or the scientific outlook, that value is imbibed on the right from the student age, then I can say that the problems which are generally faced in the life of a particular human being or as a society, the problems can be get rid of if the scientific temper is there in the society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Red? You're muted, Red.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of our speakers and guests. Today, we discussed so many problems. So let's end today on a high note with some inspiring points from our first speaker, Guy Harrison. He told us that we are far from perfect, but science and reason and other humanist values allow us to be the best humans we can be. We desperately need a better, wiser society. Don't ever lose hope. What we're doing is extremely important, but where do we start? And as our final speaker, Fahima, said, we need to start with human relationships. Although we have different backgrounds, we can aim to communicate with respect and compassion. And on that point, let's try to, in a very small way, connect with each other by turning on our cameras as we take the usual
Sam?
picture. Yeah.
All right, so
this
thank
is
you everyone for joining the conference, and we'll stop the live stream for now, and then